Hey, good evening. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Gadi Schwartz coming to you from Los Angeles. And here are the stories we're watching tonight, starting with more federal charges against Donald Trump in that classified documents case. And these new charges are completely separate from a third indictment that could come as early as tomorrow. Meanwhile, more than 1/3 of the country is expected to be in the so-called danger zone this weekend when it comes to all of this extreme heat.
What I want you to take away from this is that heat will kill.
And the family of that U.S. soldier being held in North Korea is speaking out in an exclusive interview with NBC News.
The way he went to the army to fight for America, America should fight for him.
A little bit later, why in the world is our friend Forrest Galante getting in the water with a hungry hammerhead shark? Stick around. We'll ask him.
That was not the smartest idea we've ever had. That thing was trying to eat us.
And tonight, new charges and a whole bunch of specific new details just dropped in the government's case against former President Donald Trump and the handling of classified documents, this time with text messages and mention of video surveillance. This on top of that 30-plus count indictment in June for his mishandling of those documents or alleged mishandling of those documents. These new charges include 2 more obstruction counts and 1 additional count of willful retention of national defense information and a new defendant as well. And this superseding indictment that was unsealed today says that Trump, along with 2 aides, tried to delete security cam footage at Mar-a-Lago club to prevent the footage from being provided to a federal grand jury. All of this being brought by special counsel Jack Smith, who, according to our reporting, is also about to hand down a separate federal indictment against the former president, possibly as early as tomorrow. That indictment appears to deal with Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election results. But the Trump's team disputes NBC's reporting that that's expected to happen. We're going to bring in NBC's justice reporter, Ryan Riley, to help us make sense of all of this. Ryan, what are the new specifics in this superseding indictment that weren't in the last one?
So one of the charges is regards to a specific document, but there's also these other 2 charges that have to do with this broader scheme sort of about to basically obstruct and hide this camera footage. And it's really, really interesting how this all plays out. And there's a quote, actually, that's one of the individuals saying that they wanted, quote, the boss, quote, wanted to erase this footage. And, you know, this was at the point where Donald Trump knew that the FBI was interested in these documents, knew that they were asking information about this footage, which would have showed them moving around these boxes after they were already on notification that there is this investigation ongoing. And then what the indictment sort of lays out is that there is an interest in a scheme to sort of delete those videos. And there is another individual who has spoken with about how long those videos were being retained, whether it was 45 days or exactly how long those videos would be kept around. So the idea that Donald Trump was directing this sort of program to try to delete this footage is very significant here, especially when you put it on top of what we learned from the first indictment, where Donald Trump was very interested in trying to hide these documents or telling the Justice Department that they didn't have them, and more making them disappear in some way. There was a reference in the first indictment to a lawyer basically saying that Donald Trump had said, you know, if you find those documents, and then just sort of make a swish motion saying that, you know, maybe they disappear, maybe they go away. So really some like ham-fisted efforts to obstruct this ongoing investigation that Donald Trump knew about before his home was ultimately raided by the FBI in August of 2022.
And so not only are these new charges for the former president, we also know that there's a third defendant that's been named now, Carlos de Oliveira. Do we know anything about who Carlos is?
You know, he's a maintenance worker, and I think that's something you've got to sort of just step back and take a moment to think about, because imagine if you were just anyone whose boss was putting this sort of pressure on them in that sort of scenario, basically bringing them into a federal investigation. And what the FBI alleges here is that he just straight up lied to them multiple times and said he had no idea about any of the boxes being moved, had no insight about even Trump's clothing being moved, just denial after denial after denial. And that's a big part of what the case centers on him for. And at one point, Donald Trump spoke with another Trump employee then his aide Walt Nauta spoke with another Trump employee and asked, basically whether trying to suffice or figure out whether or not this individual was loyal, and ultimately was set up with a lawyer, and Donald Trump set him up with a lawyer afterwards. And that's sort of the interesting component of this, is Donald Trump is not only holding the paychecks of the people and the livelihoods of a lot of the people who are potential defendants here, but is also sort of hanging on and paying for that legal support, which is really essential. Because, gosh, if you get sucked into a federal investigation, it can pretty quickly rip apart your finances, and just, especially if you're not someone of significant means, or you don't have a pro bono lawyer willing to do something for you for no compensation, those legal bills can add up very, very quickly and quickly devastate your overall financial situation.
And Ryan, I'm trying not to read in between the lines on this indictment, but it does seem like they are making mention of employee 3, employee 4. There are other employees not named in here, but definitely mentioned in the building of this case. Does it seem like, head of maintenance, does it seem like this could be a play for one of these guys to flip? Or does this tell us that trying to flip somebody has already failed?
Well, I think you have to look at the roles of the individuals there, because some of these individuals aren't portrayed that negatively. In fact, there's one person who is portrayed in a way saying that they sort of refused to go along with this scheme to delete the footage, and saying, this isn't a good idea. I don't think I have authority to do that. Let's ask the head of security, even though this was supposed to be sort of a one-on-one conversation. And if that indeed was a one-on-one conversation, well, then there's only really one other person who could have informed federal authorities about how that conversation went. So that suggests that they have already testified in some capacity, and while maybe not necessarily, cooperating to a certain extent, while it's not necessarily as though they're doing so to avoid charges. Some of these people just fall into different categories, and it doesn't seem like that individual really would have much criminal exposure to begin with, but seems to have told the truth to federal investigators here and helped build that case. And it really is just, if you just think about this, and you have all of these employees who are having their lawyers hired and testifying in different capacities, it's really a really unique situation that you ultimately have here, and where you just have a lot of people who are in a position to do some pretty severe damage to the former president in these cases, but are also thinking about what this means for them in the long term, because these individuals aren't like the folks who were over at the Justice Department in the lead up to January 6th, who had a pretty easy decision to make, because they could have just basically given up a couple of final weeks of paychecks and then ultimately kind of gone down in history in a pretty good way. So that's why you had Justice Department officials who weren't willing to go for Trump. But these are people in a much just different position when you have, maintenance workers who probably are having probably one of the best jobs of their lives, are paid, probably pretty well by Donald Trump overall, but really could just really quickly pull the rug from under them if they get sucked into one of these sort of federal investigations and engaged in the activity that Donald Trump was allegedly asking them to do.
Ryan Riley, thanks so much. I want to bring in MSNBC legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Cynthia Oxney. Cynthia, thanks so much for joining us. What's your read on the strength of the case after reading the documents, the charging documents that dropped today?
Right. Well, I have 3 thoughts about it. The first is that the obstruction case has gotten stronger. And that's really important, because to the extent what the former president wants to do is have a discussion about the Presidential Records Act and was he entitled to these documents, and a discussion about the documents, it shifts the entire discussion to him being deceitful, to him lying, to him trying to hide things. It's almost like it's tactile. You can touch and feel the obstruction now. Because what this document says is, the direct quote is, the boss wants the server deleted. Now, independent of the irony on how he was elected going after Hillary Clinton for just that, that's a simple discussion to have in the jury room, right? The boss wants the server deleted. Nothing could be more clear that we're not talking about something he feels he has done correctly. We're talking about something he's hiding. And juries don't like that. Juries don't like people who are either lying or hiding or cheating the system. And it's devastating for him to have this one more piece of deceit to be brought into the jury room. The second reason why it's important is it brings in the Bedminster tape. It's clear that The government has the document that's discussed in that Bedminster tape when he is joking about showing them this document, and he's not supposed to, and he can't declassify it because he's not president anymore. And that's an important piece of evidence. Now that they have the document, now that it's officially charged in this indictment, that entire audio tape of Trump's own words will come in. And the third reason why I think it's really important, which is what you were really discussing with Ryan, is it puts overwhelming pressure on these two lower level employees to flip. They really are facing the obstruction as a 20-year felony. The 1001 lying to the FBI is a 5-year felony. And as you read this indictment, you see that Jack Smith knows everything about them. He has, surveillance tape of them in the bushes. He has them walking around with flashlights. He's got them in, one of them in the room talking to this employee number 4, who's obviously testifying against them. And it's just suffocating for them, all of the evidence that Jack Smith has, and they really are optionless, or they're going to spend time in jail.
Cynthia, I'm so glad you brought up the Bedminster tape, and that tape where it's the audio tape that we heard, and I can't exactly remember, but it feels like the indictments came, and then the Bedminster tape was leaked, and there was some confusion on whether they were related, and then it was like, where's the Bedminster tape in the charging documents? And now we see it in what was released today. Is there a possibility that the federal prosecutors in the case didn't have the Bedminster tape? That was leaked to the media and then they got it? Or were they holding that close to the vest? It does seem like something that was definitely missing the first time around.
Well, they had the tape, but they didn't. It wasn't clear that they had the document that Trump was waving around. And there was a couple theories on that. Some theory is they didn't have the document, and now they do have the document because it's count 32. Other theories are they were waiting to see how the case was going to shake, and if they didn't introduce the document here, they would have had an opportunity to charge in New Jersey on that on a separate count. I mean, I just don't think we know the answer on what the strategy was, but now the strategy is it's all here. It's all coming in this trial before this judge. Which probably won't go to trial in May. My guess is it is kicked down the road, and it will ultimately end up going to trial after the January 6th case. But all of the stolen documents and the obstruction, all of those counts are now together, as best we know, in this one indictment.
All as there is another indictment possibly looming. We'll probably bring you back for that. Cynthia Oxney, thanks so very much.
Welcome.
And we've heard about close calls on the tarmac, but what about in the skies? We're going to tell you about this terrifying incident that happened at 23,000 feet.
Will you fly again?
I went 21 years without getting on an airplane, and I think after this experience, I can go the rest of my life without getting on one.
Hey there, welcome back. And here are some of the other headlines we're watching tonight. Anheuser-Busch is laying off more than 300 of its corporate workers. These cuts won't impact delivery, warehouse, or sales staff, and it comes after boycotts against Bud Light for partnering with trans influencer Dylan Mulvaney. A new bill on Capitol Hill would ban solitary confinement in federal prisons. House Democrats want to put guardrails on when and how prisons can isolate inmates. And right now, people can be kept alone in small rooms for more than 22 hours a day. A Wisconsin woman has been found guilty of murder, sexual assault, and dismembering her boyfriend, Shad Tyrion. A Green Bay jury convicted Taylor Shabiznis in just over a half an hour. And during an interrogation, she admitted to killing and mutilating him. Back in February, she even attacked her own lawyer during a court hearing. And in Florida, police arrested an 11-year-old girl because she texted a fake report that her friend was kidnapped, all for a YouTube challenge. The girl texted updates to police for an hour and a half, even describing an armed suspect driving a white van.
I'm telling you this right now, you're going to take this as a lesson at 11 years old, that if you do something stupid in the future, you're going to enjoy those cuffs.
I'm not going to do this again.
And it's one of America's most wanted pieces of jewelry right there. Someone just bought Tupac Shakur's ring, which he designed himself with gold, ruby, and diamond for over $1 million at auction. He wore it the last time he was seen in public before his death in 1996. And July is always hot, but this past month has been record-breaking and deadly. This month isn't even over, and it's expected to be the hottest month on Earth ever recorded in recent history. And today, President Biden made moves for those people who can't stay inside, and he announced new rules to protect workers, including water breaks. So today, NBC's Gadi Venegas interviewed the very people who might feel the effects.
So he says he's got to pay for rent, so he's got to come out to work even if it's hot. ¿Y qué pasa cuando hace mucho calor? ¿Duele la cabeza, los pies? ¿Qué les pasa cuando hay mucho calor así?
Cuando hay mucho calor, duele la cabeza y duele la mano cuando estamos trabajando.
¿Por estar? So he says he gets more headaches with the heat and his hands hurt a lot more.
And today, heat alerts are blanketing nearly half of the country from coast to coast. For Philadelphia, a lot of the metro area is going to feel like it's over 100 degrees. Now the city is under a heat health emergency. Joining us now from a very, very hot Philly is NBC News correspondent George Solis. George, how seriously are people taking the heat there?
Yeah, hey, Gadi. You know, out in the West Coast, you guys are used to dealing with some pretty scorching temperatures. Here in the Northeast, not as often. We've been seeing some of these temperatures swelter into the triple digits. I've been using my analog thermometer here. We're finally just away from the 100-degree mark. That is how hot it has been. People here are taking it very seriously. A lot of people getting out earlier in the day, making sure they had plenty of water breaks. We saw a lot of people wearing the loose-fitting clothing, and a lot of people taking advantage of recreational activities that included water, like the splash pads like you see behind me. Fortunately, we are catching a little bit of a break now that the sun is starting to go down here on the East Coast, but make no mistake, it is still hot out here, and this is the type of heat that isn't just uncomfortable, can be deadly. Take a listen to some of my conversation with some people that were out and about earlier today.
Most definitely. We're actually just in town for today, and we're heading back to North Carolina, where I think it'll be even hotter. So we got a lot of indoor coloring activities.
I used to be an EMT, so heat shock is a definite real thing. Always make sure you know where water is, keep some water on you, make sure that you go to the cool areas of the city. Don't go out into the middle of the business district where there's just cement everywhere.
Yeah, and you heard from the expert right there. Stay close to water. The messaging from a lot of people here in the city, of course, is refrain from being outdoors for an extended period of time, especially during those peak hours when that heat is brutal. And let me tell you, Gadi, we have been sweating, but fortunately, we've been able to take breaks in between. Our team here also staying very safe.
I know that's a city where they're used to dealing with snow and they have city resources to deal with that. But in the middle of the summer with heat like this and something that you don't normally see, does the city have resources available to deal with the heat?
Absolutely, they do. A lot of city agencies working behind closed doors to come up with plans. One of the first things they do is operate cooling centers in the city, especially in those disenfranchised areas where people may not have AC, so they're able to go to find a cool spot. They open up all the city pools. They do things like stop utility shutoffs to make sure people, even who can't pay their bills, don't get their ACs turned off, which is obviously very crucial. And then you have a number of splash pads that are open like this throughout the city. So there's definitely a number of resources. One thing the city and the health department is trying to discourage is people opening up fire hydrants. Very obvious why that might be a problem. And people from refraining from opening up, from jumping into puddles or some of our rivers and stuff, just because there aren't lifeguards there. And you definitely don't want to get yourself in a situation where you have to get first responders to those areas when they're already responding to a number of health and heat related emergencies. So yeah, definitely a lot of agencies working together to make sure people stay safe when the heat is this brutal. And make no mistake, it is brutal out here. Fortunately, a lot of people are looking forward to the weekend when we are expecting a little bit of a cool off. But even then, we know that these heat waves are happening for longer periods of time. So a lot of people, unfortunately, adjusting to the reality that this might be our new norm, Gadi.
Well, hopefully some of the mist behind you there from the splash pad blows your way. NBC, George Solis, thanks so much. And deadly fires burning around the Mediterranean are so big you can see them from space. The wildfires spreading across Greece are just absolutely massive. The island of Rhodes has been burned particularly badly there. Other countries across Europe are even sending help to get those fires under control. On the Italian island of Sicily, the fires have turned deadly. An elderly couple died when their home caught fire, and an 80-year-old woman died while an ambulance got stuck trying to help her. NBC's Claudio Lavonga has more.
A scorching heat wave continues to bake Europe, and no country is hit harder than Greece. Officials there say that in the last 24 hours alone, 61 wildfires spread across the country, forcing the evacuation of several towns. The Civil Protection Minister of Greece said the fires were supercharged by strong winds and worsened by abnormally high temperatures. And because of these extreme weather conditions, he said the battle against wildfires will continue throughout the summer, which is a major problem for Greece because the country relies heavily on tourism, and this is high season. Now, thousands of tourists were already forced to cut their holidays short on the island of Rhodes after wildfires threatened their resorts there, raising fears tourists may be discouraged from traveling to the country, at least while this emergency continues. Now, the rest of Europe is also under pressure from wildfires. Here in Italy, 2 people were found dead in their home after it was engulfed in flames in Sicily. In Croatia, wildfires are threatening the medieval town of Dubrovnik, a popular tourist destination. In Portugal, hundreds of firefighters are trying to contain a blaze close to Lisbon, and 700 acres of mountain have been burned on the Spanish island of Gran Canaria.
Claudio, thanks so much. Turning now to a nightmare of a close call in the skies over South Florida. At 23,000 feet in the air, an Allegiant Airlines plane and a private jet took what the FAA is calling evasive action to avoid crashing into each other, hurting a flight attendant in the process. NBC's Tom Costello has that story.
Allegiant Air 485 had just taken off from Fort Lauderdale, headed for Lexington, Kentucky when it happened. The pilot forced to make a sudden extreme climb, 600 feet in seconds, to avoid another plane, throwing flight attendants to the floor and terrifying passengers, including Jerica Thacker and her family, flying to Kentucky after a Caribbean cruise.
It was honestly the scariest thing I've ever been through. It felt like when you go on the top of a roller coaster and you go straight down from the highest point.
The FAA says it happened when controllers put the Allegiant flight and a Gulfstream business jet on intersecting routes both at 23,000 feet. Climb. That's when both planes' collision avoidance warnings, known as TCAS, activated, ordering the Allegiant pilot to immediately climb and the Gulfstream pilot to descend.
If not for TCAS, these airplanes would have gotten very, very, very close or have potentially collided.
The FAA says an air traffic controller had instructed Flight 485 to turn eastbound at an altitude of 23,000 feet when it crossed in front of a northbound Gulfstream business jet.
One of our flight attendants got injured.
While none of the 175 passengers was injured, one flight attendant was hurt.
Allegiant 485, we're going to declare an emergency on your behalf.
Allegiant tells NBC News Flight 485 returned to Fort Lauderdale, where a flight attendant was treated for injuries. But for Jerica Thacker, it was all too much. She and her family drove back to Kentucky.
I went 21 years without getting on an airplane, and I think after this experience, I can go the rest of my life without getting on one.
Tom Costello, thanks so much. And coming up, migrants are being turned away at the southern border and being deported by plane, by ice air. We're going to explain. But first, you got to see this. This was a scary commute for people in San Francisco this week. A woman got out of her car in the middle of the highway, started shooting a gun in the air and at cars. And the reason why she's blurred is because she was naked. She hit a few cars, but luckily no one was hurt in that incident. She was taken into police custody and is now getting mental health treatment at a hospital. I'll be right back. Hey there, welcome back. Let's get you caught up in 30 seconds. Former President Donald Trump was just hit with additional criminal charges in the classified documents case, and he still faces another separate federal indictment involving election interference that could come out as soon as tomorrow. And a commercial airline had to change altitude so abruptly to avoid a mid-air collision with a Gulfstream jet that a flight attendant got hurt. The incident happened at 23,000 feet. And it has been a brutal summer for people that have to work outside. Now, President Biden is implementing new measures to keep those workers safe in the heat. And the White House has given a warm welcome to Giorgia Meloni today, Italy's new far-right prime minister. And if you're like, That seems interesting. You are right. The president's administration was initially a bit hesitant about Meloni's conservative ideology, but seemed to change its tune when she showed support for Ukraine in the war. NBC's Ali Rafa has more.
Yeah, Gadi, this warm welcome that Prime Minister Meloni received at the White House today didn't seem likely even less than a year ago when she won her election, with the president being publicly apprehensive of her leadership because of her far-right views on issues like abortion, of LGBTQ rights. But Meloni has been praised on the world stage, really, for her foreign policy decisions and positions. And according to the White House, that's really what these two focused on in their meeting today. No surprise, the war in Ukraine took up a large chunk of this meeting, with Meloni proving herself to be a staunch supporter of Ukraine, Italy hosting more than 150,000 Ukrainians on Italian soil, rather, and Biden and Meloni pledged to continue working together on working out how to continue supporting Ukraine for as long as their war with Russia continues to go forward. These two also discussed their shared interest in reducing dependence, both technologically and economically, on China. This is all coming as Meloni reportedly considers pulling Italy out of a key infrastructure deal that Italy has with China. That deal expected to expire in less than a year now. These two also discussed the migration crisis that Italy is facing and has faced for years now, with migrants in the tens of thousands coming from the Middle East, coming from North Africa, arriving at Italy's really front steps, and Italy has been struggling to provide them with the resources that they need, even as recently as a few days ago declaring a state of emergency to be able to provide them with those resources. These two also discussed issues like the global threat of climate change, food insecurity, even talking about how they can partner in the future for the future of space exploration. So there was really no shortage of topics that were discussed during this meeting between the Italian Prime Minister and the President today, Gadi.
Ali Rafa, thanks so much. Now, remember Title 42? That was that public health order that allowed the U.S. government to expel migrants at the border without giving them a chance to seek asylum. That expired in May, and with it ending, a lot of people predicted a surge in illegal border crossings, but that hasn't exactly panned out. Gabe Gutierrez is in Texas with more.
None of the passengers on this plane want to be here. It's called ICE Air, and those on board are being deported.
Right now, more than 100 migrants are being loaded from these buses onto this plane. They're bound for Honduras.
Since mid-May, the Department of Homeland Security says it's repatriated 85,000 people. That's up 65% compared to the same period last year.
The department is sending a clear message about the consequences of coming in the United States seeking asylum improperly.
NBC News also getting rare access to this processing center in Hidalgo, Texas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
But this week, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas was grilled on Capitol Hill.
You're the most dishonest witness that has ever appeared before the Judiciary Committee.
You should be impeached.
The administration touting a 42% drop in illegal crossings since the pandemic border restriction known as Title 42 was lifted in May.
Our approach of expanding lawful pathways for people to reach the border and delivering consequences for those who arrive at our border irregularly is working.
Mayorkas says the process is more orderly, but the drop in illegal border crossings does not mean there's been a big decline in migrants coming into the U.S. Multiple law enforcement sources tell NBC News the numbers are still high, with Republicans now blasting the Biden administration for creating a new legal channel, releasing tens of thousands of migrants each month into the U.S. who use a new mobile app to schedule their screening appointments.
You've got the turnstile open, or so long as they've gone and downloaded this app, you just let them in.
In Matamoros, Mexico, we found a tent camp with more than 1,000 migrants, many telling us they're still waiting for months to make an appointment on the app, often getting error messages. This man from Venezuela, with severe pains in his leg, rushed to an ambulance after collapsing in the sweltering heat. Many women and children in this camp need help, he begged.
Some incredible reporting from the ground. Gabe joins us now, and Gabe's actually in Iowa on the campaign trail with Governor DeSantis there. First off, when it comes to politics and the campaign trail, is immigration and the border coming up as much as we've seen it in previous campaigns?
Yeah, certainly, Gadi. Look, it's a huge topic in this GOP primary, and we were in Texas and Mexico earlier this week. Now we're here in Iowa as 10 presidential candidates set to speak here tomorrow. Governor DeSantis at an event right now, and at his events throughout the day, he has brought up the border. He actually is touting the endorsement of several sheriffs here. One of them who introduced him earlier today also talked about how he thought Governor DeSantis was strong at the border, and making the point that even Iowa considers itself a border state. Why? Because of the growing number of illegal border crossings that we had seen now for so many months. Some in this conservative primary, of course, feel that this is impacting the entire country, and it is a huge issue in this GOP primary, and of course this crucial early state of Iowa.
It must be so odd for you to be, sitting in the back listening to those campaign speeches and having lived and seen what you just saw and reported on. This week, a federal judge blocked a Biden administration policy that could drastically change the immigration system again. When it comes to the White House, do you think that they are going back to the drawing board on immigration?
Look, there's a lot of questions surrounding that change. So again, earlier this week, this federal court blocked the Biden administration's stricter asylum policies that they put into place earlier this year. You just saw in that report. That's why the Biden administration says that part of its illegal border crossing numbers are down. If that goes away, in other words, if those stricter asylum measures are no longer allowed to be in place, yes, it's possible the numbers could go up. At least that's what the administration is trying to fight against. They are appealing the judge's decision, and the judge did have an issue of 14-day stay, so it should be at least less than 2 weeks before we know whether that ruling now takes away those stricter asylum policies. Bottom line, Gadi, immigration is still a major issue despite the ending of Title 42, and we expect to hear a lot about it in the campaign trail in the coming months, Gadi.
Really appreciate all your insights. Gabe Gutierrez, thanks so much. And last week, an American soldier made a mad dash into North Korea. No one knows why, and no one has heard from him since. Now his family is begging for his safe return. That's coming up right after the break. Hey there, let's take a quick look around the world in 80 seconds. Remember when Wagner group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin, the guy who apparently tried to lead that rebellion against the Kremlin from Ukraine? Well, today, he and Russian President Vladimir Putin were seen at the same summit in St. Petersburg. No word on exactly what Prigozhin was doing there, but it could have something to do with the Wagner's group big influence in Africa. And in the UK, Prince Harry is going to court. London's High Court ruled today that Harry's invasion of privacy lawsuit against Rupert Murdoch's tabloids can go to trial, or at least part of it. They rejected a claim that Murdoch and the palace conspired to cover up some royals' phone hacking. Now, this is just one of 4 cases Harry and Meghan are hoping to take to court. Meanwhile, Syrian state media is reporting that several people are dead after vehicles exploded near Damascus. It is the second attack to happen outside a holy pilgrimage site for Shiite Muslims. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack. And this week marks 70 years since the Korean War ended, and to mark the occasion, North Korea decided to show off some banned ballistic missiles. Top representatives from Russia and China sat right next to Kim Jong-un during that showcase, and behind them, an old wartime slogan that read, "Resist U.S. aggressors." And it has been more than a week since American soldier Travis King made a mad dash from South Korea into North Korea. And the U.S. says he was likely taken into North Korean custody, but we really have no idea exactly where he is nor how he's doing. And with each passing day, his family is getting more desperate, more worried. NBC's Matt Bradley sat down with them for this NBC News exclusive.
NBC News has been speaking exclusively to the family of Private Travis King. And if you remember, this is the young man who darted across the border into North Korea more than a week ago. And in that time, we still haven't heard from Private King or from the North Koreans even acknowledging that they have him in custody. Now, we've heard from the family, and they've expressed once again that they were baffled by this behavior, but also baffled by his behavior here in South Korea. He was engaged in at least 2 accusations of assault by South Korean police, and he served a little bit of time, nearly 2 months, in a South Korean prison. And he was actually supposed to be on his way back to the United States, where he was going to be facing probably more military discipline. But we've spoken with this family, and they expressed some level of frustration as well with the U.S. government. Here's what they said.
I feel like he shouldn't have been at that border in the first place. I feel like whoever job it was for him to get on a plane to come back home should have made sure that he had his passport and everything, and that he was able to get on that plane to come back home.
Sounds like a suicide attempt, because why would he want to run to our enemies? The story is way deeper than what I can imagine. I just feel like deep down in my heart, my brother was afraid of something. Because why would he run? You know, what was his point if he was coming home?
And so even though we haven't heard from Private Travis King or the North Koreans regarding his situation, some of the experts that I've been speaking to have said that everybody needs to be patient, that they're probably in the midst of interrogating him. It's quite likely that they will simply release him if they determine that he's not a threat and maybe more trouble than he's worth. But we need to be patient and wait for them to finish basically figuring out why he did what he did.
And so close to coming home. Matt Bradley, thanks so much. And tensions are running high in the West African country of Niger, where an alleged military coup seems to be underway. A group of soldiers announced on state television yesterday that they had overthrown the country's president, who is currently detained in his residence. But he did tweet today suggesting democracy will be safeguarded. The U.S. State Department is also calling for his immediate release.
We are gravely concerned about the developments in Niger. The situation remains fluid. President Bazoum is detained in his residence. We call for the immediate release of President Bazoum and for the respect of the rule of law and public safety.
NBC's Courtney Kuby has the latest from Niger.
It's been just under 48 hours since the president of Niger, Mohamed Bazoum, was taken into custody by members of his own Presidential Guard forces. It happened in Niamey. He's been in custody, according to U.S. officials. Since then, he's believed to be in good condition. But late last night, a group of Nigerian military officials appeared on state-run TV, claiming that they had not only ousted the democratically elected president, but that they were now running the government. As part of this, they dissolved the Constitution. They issued a nationwide curfew, which we're actually under right now, and they closed the nation's borders. So that means they've also closed the airspace. No flights, military or civilian, are coming or going from Niger until late next week. Now, it seems that the curfew right now is holding, but earlier today, we saw bigger and more violent protests than we saw during the first day of this, what seems to be an attempted coup by members of the Nigerian military. Now, as part of the protests today, the protesters who seemed to be in favor of the Nigerian military and Presidential Guard forces, who've now seem to be running the government, but they set a number of vehicles on fire. They were yelling, and in addition to that, they were even unfurling Russian flags. Now, the curfew's in effect. It seems to be holding. The streets are much quieter than they were earlier today, but we're just entering what will soon be day 3 since what seems to be a coup to take out the democratically elected president here in Niger.
Courtney Kuby, thanks so much. Our next guest is taking Shark Week to a whole new level. If you saw a hammerhead next to your boat, you'd probably stay inside the boat, maybe. Well, not for Escalante. He decided it was a perfect time for a dip.
That was not the smartest idea we've ever had. That thing was trying to eat us.
And tonight on The Future of Everything, you know how science is supposed to go super, super slow, super methodical, peer-reviewed, boring on purpose? Well, you know what doesn't mesh well with all of that going viral online before all that can happen, and that is exactly what we're seeing play out right now with what could be a massive breakthrough in superconductors. It could change so much of our world, or it could be a total flop. So all this seems to be coming out of South Korea right now, where a small team of researchers are saying they just made the holy grail of conducting electricity, a room temperature superconductor. So what is that? Well, basically, it's a material that can conduct electricity with no resistance at normal temperatures instead of like negative 200 degrees. And if this is all true, it could potentially revolutionize things like computer chips, manufacturing, levitating trains, electric cars, phones. And researchers say, quote, "We believe that our new development will be a brand new historical event that opens a new era for mankind." So we're going to bring in our official immune to hype, bring us back down to earth technology correspondent Jake Ward, who joins us now. Jake, big promises. This has gone way viral, but is it legit?
So that's right, Gadi. I mean, right, the physics Twitter is freaking out right now over this paper, but they are pretty evenly split, right, on the question of whether or not this thing is legit or not. This multi-university team out of South Korea says that they took basically 3 materials that any scientist can get their hands on inside a lab and baked them together for about 36 hours, and in the process created this gray superconducting material that they say does what nothing before it has been able to. Basically, when you're trying to move electricity from one place to another, that electricity tends to bump into a certain amount of resistance. What's cool about a superconductor is the idea that you could basically do away with that resistance and go from having the kind of friction-filled experience of running your hand over something like sandpaper to the, just the absolutely slick movement of something, moving it across something like glass. The possibilities of being able to do that, incredible. But up until now, you've had to chill down something that can superconduct to such a low temperature that it makes it totally impractical. We're not going to get our phones down to these outrageous temperatures. But this team says they've been able to do it. They made this gray substance that they say can actually move electricity from place to place with 0 resistance without having to get to these crazy temperatures. And that, as you say, would be revolutionary. It would be outrageous. You would not only be able to create phones and electric lines that don't heat up. I mean, you could revolutionize the way that we hold electricity inside a battery. You could put electricity into a coil and essentially hold it there forever. It is outrageous that that could happen. But as you mentioned, important to note here, this thing has not been peer-reviewed. Nobody else has tried to do this. It's in a preprint, which means that nobody, right, no jury of their peers, no other scientists have really had a chance to review it. And we've seen promises like this before. As recently as 2020, a University of Rochester team claims they did something like this. Then a Chinese team came along, tried to do it. They couldn't pull it off. So we have to wait, but boy, are people excited in the meantime, Gadi.
The crazy thing about this one is we have to wait. Normally it goes to preprint and, some universities get it. At this point, like everybody has it because it's gone out on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it these days. And it is somewhat open source. So I've seen some people on X saying that they're going to try this out. They're having trouble getting phosphorus here in the United States, but like at-home experiments to try to replicate this. Have there been any breakthroughs, any promising leads from either labs or people that are just trying to do this at home?
Well, what's so amazing is that, yeah, typically it would take, superconducting experiments require incredible amounts of resources and training and all of this stuff. But in this case, I mean, we're really talking about phosphorus, sulfur, just things that you could really slap together. And because it only took about 36 hours to make this stuff, according to the paper, I mean, we could see people in theory replicate this in days or weeks, which means that you could have conceivably people truly backing this up and saying, oh, yeah, we did it at home and we found that it worked as well. If that were to happen, this could be a tremendous, tremendous breakthrough. I think the other thing that's sort of interesting to note here is that this team, while they are, I'm sure fully conscious of how, that this is, a little bit cart before the horse, I think it's really interesting to note that there's only 3 authors on the paper. And as scientists have been pointing out to me over the last 24 hours, a Nobel Prize can only be awarded to a maximum of 3 authors across 2 papers. That's exactly what we've seen from these folks. It seems that they are at least preparing for the possibility of greatness here, Gadi.
So for the layman, does that suggest, is that like a green flag, this is possibly legit, or is that a red flag, possibly not?
I think it's a green flag. It's kind of a beige flag, right? It's a little bit sort of like the egotistical, it's like a 14-year-old staying out of parties because he thinks he'll be governor someday. It's a little bit of that, but it's also the idea that you are trying to be qualified for something amazing. And again, I think, I don't want to overhype something that hasn't been checked out by anybody else. But if this were to happen, and the fact that we are as close as we are to doing it such that we're seeing people claiming that they can do it as often as they are, when that happens, it really could be incredible. I mean, think about this. We lose 100 billion kilowatt hours of electricity every year just to the resistance of moving electricity from one place to another. If we did away from that, did away with that, solar power, all the renewable energy that we're looking at right now, we lose like $6 billion worth of that every year in the United States. The fact that we could save all of that will be amazing. So I would like to say, I hope these guys do it. And even if they don't, let's keep trying, because if they break through, it'll be incredible, Gadi.
Fingers crossed. Jake Ward, thanks so much. Wild times. And for those who celebrate, it is officially Shark Week. That's that annual television event dedicated to the ocean apex predator. Some of it educational, a lot of it just straight up terrifying. But not everyone is scared, including a friend of the show, Forrest Galante, who had his own encounter with a hammerhead shark just a few days ago. Check this out.
Stumbled onto something that very, very few people, if anybody, has ever seen, and that's a hammerhead at Anaconda. You watch me. Oh, there's his tail. There he is. Get in the water. There he is. And of course, the smart thing to do when you find a shark is 500 miles where it shouldn't be, out of its range, with absolutely nobody around but 4 idiots in a boat, is cut up the 4 idiots in a bathtub, is cut up the beautiful fish that you've just shot, feed it to him, and then get in the water with him.
That was not the smartest idea we've ever had. That thing was trying to eat us.
Forrest Galante is with us now somehow. So Forrest, I don't know if I'm the one that's supposed to tell you this, but the thing about Shark Week is, like, you have to survive to get to Shark Week, to celebrate Shark Week. Okay, first of all, where were you guys and why?
Sure. So, Gadi, that's actually a video from the El Nino in 2015. It did just go up a few days ago, but that's at Anacapa Island in the northern Channel Islands, which is an incredible, biodiverse, rich place, but not a normal home to scalloped or smooth-fronted hammerheads. But during that El Nino event in 2015, my buddies and I, who were out diving together, were utterly shocked to run into this hammerhead. And we just couldn't help ourselves. But we were actually cleaning our fish for the day, and we couldn't help ourselves but to jump in and see it. Little did I know at that time, and I like to say I'm a shark expert, little did I know at that time that the shark was going to be so aggressive. And he really did come in fully fired up, which luckily we still have all our fingers and toes, but he tried to prove otherwise.
So aggressive and so much bigger underwater. Yeah, I thought, maybe it was from a few days ago because you posted it, but then I just saw the video. Like, I know you grow a very powerful beard, but growing a powerful beard like that in a few days, yeah, no. Should have been alarm bells.
Yeah, exactly. That's the key right there.
We've got another sighting, I think, that you captured during your Discovery series in an episode called Alien Sharks. It's one of my favorites. Let's take a quick look.
Please.
They're not fighting. They're mating. Never in all my years of diving have I seen active shark mating right in front of my eyes. Unbelievable.
I mean, a little X-rated there. How was it?
Gadi, it takes a special kind of person to get that excited about shark sex, and that's what you're seeing right there. And, there's more to it than that. For the guys and I to be able to capture such a unique moment that, quite frankly, we're pretty sure has never been captured on video before, to see these striped pajama sharks actively engage in mating was an unbelievable moment for us. And, we never expected to see it last. We never expected to see it occur. And we stayed there for the full copulation. We watched the male come in, grab onto the female, wrestle her to the ground, insert his claspers into her cloaca and finish the job. And it was really quite something to see in film. And I think when we filmed it, we never knew it was going to make it to air during Shark Week. But sure enough, it's a headlining feature, and it's pretty cool.
Thanks for taking the romance out of all of that. I mean, sharks, I thought sharks needed love too. Okay, finally, I've been dying to ask you this. Cocaine sharks, like we're hearing about that. Is that really a thing?
No, it's so preposterous. It's been blown all out of proportion by all media outlets. And here's the thing. There are sharks that are incredibly inquisitive. Tiger sharks are known as the dumpsters of the sea, right? They'll go up and take a nibble of just about anything. But any shark that comes along and takes a bite into a bale of cocaine, first of all, it isn't getting high. It's likely getting sick. And secondly, it's turning around and leaving. It's not getting some kind of, jazzed up, ready to go to the club energy out of it and starting to chew on people, which I think is what the headlines are sort of portraying. It's fun to play around with it, but the truth is there are actual problems with chemical overdoses in the system and animals bioaccumulating foreign chemicals that can really mess them up. But the whole idea of a cocaine shark that's, a cocaine bear on a killing spree is utterly silly.
Forrest Galante setting the record straight. Thanks so much for being with us tonight, brother.
See you, buddy.
Happy Shark Week. That does it for us tonight. I'm Gadi Schwartz. We'll see you tomorrow, but until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.